Hello, I have a short video to offer you today, partly in response to requests from several people recently about a particular sound that we use in Continuum, which we call the Jaques, and partly because this happens to be a time when I'm really using the Jaques. The Jaques are something that we use specifically for working with bones and joints. Emily Conrad, founder of Continuum, used to talk about the Jaques as stimulating fluid in the bone. And this is particularly useful for me right now because I've broken my wrist, broke my radius right in here. So I've been using Continuum in many different ways to support my healing, and it's absolutely amazing to observe how the wave created within, the natural movement of water, of fluid through waves and spirals and pulsations, how it moves through the dense area that was created here when I fell on my hand. And I could feel at the time the densification, the tissues there just locked up immediately, and nothing could go through them. Just to give you a brief miraculous story about Continuum before I teach you the sound and we explore with it a bit. The day after I fell, my arm was very painful and I couldn't lift it up. It was just much too painful to lift up. And so I lay down on my bed and I began doing some Continuum. And within moments, my arm floated up into the air. Just in that moment, my husband walked into the room and I said, "Look at this, I can't do this." And my arm was just very fluidly floating and didn't hurt at all. It's the first time it began to feel good. So if you injure yourself, I highly recommend Continuum. Of course, I recommend it if you don't injure yourself as well. But this sound that we're going to do today, called the Jaques, we often spell it like Jacques in French, Jaqueus, but it's called the Jaques. People used to call it the Jaques and socks, just for fun, I think. But it sounds like this. It has a strong buzzy kind of sound. The vibration of the sound goes into the bone and the joint that you're making contact with. You want to be making contact with something, like putting your hand on something. I found it took a few days for the vibration to be able to go through the cast, but you could put your hand directly on a bone or a joint, and generally we do that with the Jaques, and the vibration will go there. So the way we do this sound is you can think of it as being a combination of a j and a z sound. So if you were going to go, I actually think about it as being like Jesus, je, z. No offense to anybody, but it helps me remember the sound. So it's like this as we start to get into it. So as if you're alternating j and z. And you do that until you're ready to take another breath, and then you breathe in. I encourage people to breathe in through your nose because that's a more calming kind of breath. And then you do it again. So breathing in, try it with me. And it's in your own timing, however long your breath lasts. Once you've got the hang of that, then you start kind of blurring them together so that they become less like a je and a z, and they start to blend. And become less regular. So it's not zh, zzz, zh, zzz. It's more like this. We usually do several Jaques in each place to make sure we get the vibration of the sound. We need several in order to get enough vibration into the particular joint or bone where we're making contact. And we always want to be in contact. Say I have an issue with my shoulder, I'd put my hand on my shoulder. And in Continuum, we tend to think of where the hands are, that they serve like tuning forks. So the vibration of the sound or the breath we're doing tends to go there more than if we didn't. So particularly that's important with the Jaques, so that the vibration of the sound really goes right there. And you can use the Jaques in any part of the body, with any joints or bones. If you have a particular problem, it may be helpful for you to have a consultation with a Continuum teacher or practitioners to get support with specific positioning. But in general, if you have your hand in relation to the bone or the joint in question, it should be helpful and start stimulating the fluid there and support things in dissolving and for the biointelligence to do its work there. So what I'd like to show you today is what I've been working with a lot since I've injured my wrist, and that involves the whole upper extremity, the arms. And just adjust this so you can see better. So I'm going to start by putting my hands, and you'll have to imagine a bit how this one is, that it's similar to this one, because I can't quite do it on both sides. I'm going to start by putting my hands on my shoulders, and I'm not sure you can totally see this. There you go. Right. And I'm going to do several Jaques there. It's helpful, as I said, to do several in each place. Usually we do 5 or 6 Jaques in each place. So each time I take a breath, that's a Jaques. So I'm going to put my hands on my shoulders and do 5 or 6 there. Then on the elbows and do 5 or 6 there. Then on the wrists, and again, I can't quite do that with this hand, but I think you get the idea. And then linking the hands together, and you can put your hands, it looks a little strange with my cast, I'm sorry, but you can put your hands against the sternum here when you do that for added benefit. And you can do this either sitting up or lying down. Okay. Once you've done all that, then you go into open attention, just being present with whatever your experience is. You don't necessarily experience a lot of movement with the Jaques, but you'll probably have different kinds of sensations. I noticed that the first few years that I did the Jaques, I didn't really notice that much movement, but kind of a tingling, bubbly kind of feeling could happen. What I'm noticing now with this injury is that I could really feel something going in there, and kind of, it's very soothing actually. It's kind of like a bubbling stream going into the dense, swollen, injured area and caressing it and kind of going like this through the dense area, helping it to dissolve. Okay. So I'm going to do this, and I'd invite you to either observe me and let the demonstration feed you. Okay, there could be a communication from my system to yours, because I do a lot of this and there's a lot of fluidity here. and fluid communicates through resonance. So you may very well feel this in your own body as I'm doing it, and then do it on your own. You may want to join in and do it with me since you're watching this in your own time. Okay, so actually before we start, let's take a moment, and I do encourage you to do this with me. Take a moment to settle in. We talk about starting Continuum with a baseline, where we check in with our breath and our ground. What is our starting point? I'm noticing I've just done my Continuum practice, so I'm feeling fairly fluid. I could, my body could just start moving like this very easily. My breath is fairly full. I've already done this. I'm feeling a fair bit of tingling in here, which feels quite good. Like it's waking up. It feels like it's being nourished. And I'm also aware of, I'm sitting on the floor. By the way, I'm in an apartment that my husband and I stay in when we come to New York. We're here for the week. Well, a biodynamic craniosacral therapy training is happening, and I'm taking this opportunity to make this video here. So I'm sitting on the floor, and I can feel my sits bones on the floor. I can feel the support of the floor. I have a sense, a fair bit of melting into the floor with the lower part of my body, and I have a nice sense of rising up through my midline from there. Wasn't quite this lovely before I did my practice. So we do the baseline in the beginning. It's like collecting our initial data. Then we do our inquiry, doing whatever we do with Continuum, and then we come back to the baseline again and see how things have changed. So collecting our data after the experiment, so to speak. It's like a scientific experiment. So also the baseline gives us a chance to settle. And once I have a chance to settle here and be aware of my breath and my ground, my relationship with the earth, I'm going to start by putting my hands on my shoulders and doing 5 or 6 Jaques, like this. And as I do them, I'm interested in the sense of the vibration wherever I may feel it in my body. And I'm definitely not just feeling it where my hands are. I feel it through my whole trunk area, my head, especially the back of my head, and even a bit down into my legs and my arms. You can see I am quite fluid already, and my body's spontaneously moving into these undulations, fluid movement, which feels quite lovely. When I'm I've done 5 or 6, I move on to the elbows. And then moving on to the wrists. If you're not in a cast like I am, you can hold both your wrists at the same time, and that could be very helpful. If you have a problem doing it with both hands, you can do one at a time, whatever works for you, just so long as you have the contact. Oops, we're at wrists here. And finally moving on to interlink the fingers and holding as much of the hands as you can. And if you wish to, if you can put it against your sternum to get that added benefit. That is, your sternum gets the added benefit. So you notice my arm has definitely responded here. I've done 5 or 6. Don't worry if you lose count. It's more or less 5 or 6. Then I'm going to move into open attention, letting my fingers unlatch and see what happens. So if you have an injury like this, chances are a lot will happen in relation to that injured place, the intelligence knows where to go. But you may be surprised what else is happening right now. You can't see it, but my legs are also moving. You see my other arms moving, my whole trunk, my head. It feels quite lovely. That's a great stretch. Jaw. And just allowing what arises here, listening for what's slow, fluid, unfamiliar, as in not my usual patterns. And you notice this isn't the kind of everyday functional movement that we might engage in, but is very flowing, fluid, spacious. And here I'm dropping into what Emily would call the cosmic tissue anatomy. I feel like I'm suspended in the cosmos and just being held here, supported. Like I'm being fed. Now this isn't a position I would normally be able to hold, and you probably can't see, but I'm leaning quite a ways back here, but not really using my stomach muscles particularly to do that, just as I wasn't really using these muscles to hold up my arm, even with the extra weight of the cast. It's just floating, suspended. Now, you may or may not have a sense of much movement in your open attention. It depends on how much fluidity there is in your system. But in Continuum, we practice being with what is. To me, it's a mindfulness practice, being with what is actually there, what's actually happening. What are your actual sensations in the moment? Not looking to create movement because you think there's supposed to be movement. There's always movement, okay? Emily would say, movement isn't something we do, it's something we are. We are vibration, we are movement. And there's always movement happening within us, even if it's the breath of each cell. There are subtle movements happening, and it's in those subtle places, which may seem like stillness, where change and healing really happen. So I invite you to practice this. Let yourself slow down. I'm feeling much slower after doing this, actually. And I hope you enjoy it and that it's helpful for you. And I wish you fluid, resilient bones and joints. And may that fluid resilience influence your life in many wonderful ways. And I'd love to hear about how this affects you. So feel free to leave a comment in my blog or to send me an email, sheriona@sheriona.com. I love to hear how these things affect people. And thank you so much for listening and watching and being part of this. Fluid blessings.